Welcome back to The Big Show. It's always nice to meet a hero and a star and one of my favourite people, Sandi Toksvig. How are you?
I'm well. I'm a bit overwhelmed by the introduction, but thank you.
You see, the thing about you is you're so funny and spontaneous. Why can't I be that bright?
Oh, I don't think you'd want to be me. It's really just being a moving target is the truth of it. So it always worries me when you get introduced at something and they say, and here now, one of the funniest when you think, oh, what if I'm not today? What if I'm just dull and boring?
And my second problem is you have a lollipop. What's all that about then?
I love licorice, okay? Really love licorice. And recently I decided I would give up coffee. This is so boring, but I'll tell you anyway. I'd give up coffee because it's not good for your heart, right? So I give up coffee and I have to have something else. So I love licorice. So I started drinking licorice tea. And my blood pressure went through the roof. So I thought, I must be stressed. And yet I don't feel stressed at all. I went to the doctor and the doctor said, have you changed anything? I said, yes, I've given up coffee, so my blood pressure should be better. No, licorice. Number one thing to raise your blood pressure, higher than salt. So I had to give it up and I've gone back to coffee. So I treat myself once a week to a licorice lollipop and you catch me in the act.
So is this to relieve the stress of talking to an idiot like me?
I don't suffer from stress. It's bad, isn't it? I should. Everybody has stress, don't they? Everybody has some kind of stress. But mostly I find life faintly entertaining. So I'm all right.
And that's what I love about you. I've never seen you and not laughed because you have a funny bone, don't you? You have this way of making your stories humorous. Were you born like that?
I come from a family who laugh a lot, sadly mostly at each other's misfortunes. Nothing we like better than an elderly relative falling off a chair. That just makes the rest of us cry with laughter. So it was certainly in my DNA. And then I came to this country when I was 14 and I had a thick American accent and I was sent to British boarding school. Frankly, I think due to misunderstanding with my American high school, I got thrown out because I had no idea you were supposed to be there every day. And I got sent here and discovered very quickly that actually having a sense of humour is a terrific defence mechanism. So it's that very dull old story of the comic who uses it as a bit of a shield, probably. And now it's just become, second nature to me.
Please don't tell me you're crying inside. I want to feel that you're happy.
I'm not crying at all. No, mostly I think life's pretty cheery. And if, of course there are lots of things that are sad, and then you try and do something about them. Don't just sit in a corner and go, isn't it terrible? There are some things I can't do anything about. Afghanistan, quite beyond me. But other things I try. I do what I can.
The interesting thing about the news quiz, which I love on Radio 4, is that you're able to take the most serious stories and just make jokes about them. Isn't that marvellous?
Do you know, it's great, but I tell you what, I would absolutely pay tribute to the type of comedian we have on the news quiz, and there is definitely a type, is that the jokes are great and wonderful, and I sit there weeping with laughter, but everybody makes good political points. We do say some pretty serious stuff, and I sometimes think we are the actual opposition to the government. We're actually the ones who say, can you all please pay attention? And I hear it whispered that there are many MPs who make it a regular date to listen to the news quiz, which I'm delighted about.
It's interesting you say that. In that chair a few days ago, I had Roy Hudd, who did the headlines for so many years, and he said the same thing. It's amazing what you can get away with when you do it with a laugh.
Oh, absolutely. And we even have a pop at the BBC sometimes. We had a pop a couple of weeks ago. They were trying to bring in a new rule that you can't make any cruel jokes. And so we had a long discussion about where the line might be drawn. Is it okay to be cruel about people that who just deserve it? And I could name names, but I won't. Where do you draw the line? So, no, we don't... We're not censored in any way, which is great.
It's interesting, that show as well, that the best bits are the bits that aren't scripted. Most of it is, and it has to be, of course, because it's a programme that's got to be funny, so there's got to be a certain amount of jokes written. But the best moments come where you're just joking amongst yourselves, and you're brilliant at that. When were you able to just think that quickly? Because, I have great lines, but they're normally in the car about 20 minutes later.
Well, the 20 minutes later thing is something called esprit d'escalier, and this is an expression you need to know, which is a French expression called the spirit of the stairs. And many people suffer from this, and it's when you've had a huge row with somebody and you've slammed the door and you're on your way out and you're going down the stairs, and in that moment you think of the very thing that you should have said, and it's too late then. My father was a very famous live broadcaster for Danish television, so I grew up knowing that there was just one moment in which you had to speak, and it was now. So probably that is something that's been with me always. But I will say about the show, I suspect the show does sound heavily scripted, and honestly it isn't. None of the guests on the news quiz know what the questions are going to be, so they do not have an opportunity to prepare anything. Now, you'd be pretty stupid not to try and guess Headlines, I think, are a help in newspapers. But they do not have anything that is remotely scripted. I do have a wonderful team of writers, and I have a bank of jokes, one-liners pretty much, that I have written down that we work on over a 2-day period before the recording of the news quiz, because I like to keep the show just funny, and I call it the strike rate. I like there to be a really good laugh kind of every 30 seconds. So if the ball has been dropped, as we say in comedic terms, it's my job to pick it up again, and then I have the blessing of having this backlog of stuff. But of course, the really funny stuff is when we're just on a riff, backwards and forwards, and then it's a joy. A lot of it not broadcast because, frankly, filth and libel.
That Spirit d'Escalier thing, isn't that because the restaurants were on the first floor in France and that it was people who had forgot to say things as they were coming down and already in the car? Isn't that the story where that came from?
Oh, well, no, that may be. See, now you've added to my knowledge of that thing, but it is wonderful, isn't it? It is a wonderful notion that, if I just had that minute again.
I was trying to be a clever dick there because that's what people like you and Stephen Fry are. You've always got the story, and no matter what anybody says to you, you seem to know more. And I wish I was as well educated because I'd love to be that clever.
I don't know if it's about being that clever. I think it's about constantly being curious. A lot of these things are lost in the mists of time. It's like the game of bridge has about 28 stories about why it's called bridge, and one of them is that there were 2 families who played this game and there was a bridge between their houses, which is so ridiculous and absurd. But I like trying to discover the root of something and why something. And what's so astonishing about the internet is that that Googling, which I think sounds so vulgar, you Google something, and then it suggests something else, which suggests something else, which suggests something else. And I never, ever get to the finite point of knowledge and think, well, now I really know everything there is to know about that thing. And as long as you remain curious, I think the world's endlessly fascinating.
When was the last time you were caught Googling?
I Google every day. I don't tell anybody. It's one of my vices. I Google relentlessly. I'm always looking things up. Was I looking at the word? Oh, the word yesterday that came up in reading. I'm reading Mary Wollstonecraft's letters from Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. And she talks a lot about prelapsarian life. Do you know this word, prelapsarian?
Never heard of it.
No, I felt I should have done. Anyway, it refers to the golden age before the fall of mankind. Now, I don't know when this was, and certainly it wasn't in my time.
Wasn't it just before Jordan's first book was published?
That's probably a very good... That was the prelapsarian period of publication. But isn't it a wonderful word? I command you to go out and use it.
No, I want you to use it on the news quiz this week. You can fit it in somewhere, I'm sure.
Do you know, I do have bets sometimes with friends to see... Could you get the word? It has to be quite casually done. So, yeah, I'll see what I can do. I'll leave that with me.
Is it also nice, as well as being a great host, being a great guest? I mean, you're loved on things like Graham Norton's show, and let's face it, you're not his average guest, because most of his people are people like Jordan and the amazing megastars and the movie stars and all that kind of stuff. But you go on to add a bit of class. Is it nice to be you? I
don't know about that. I usually go on because somebody's dropped out. Graham's my friend, and we've known each other a very long time, and he'll ring me and say... oh, I don't know, somebody fantastically famous, I can't make it. And usually somebody I've never heard of. I had a very embarrassing, because I'm not very zeitgeist, and I was in a lift with a very nice young woman. I thought she was from makeup, and she turned out to be an actress called Minnie Driver. Well, I had absolutely no idea. And as a consequence, possibly treated her with a little bit of a cavalier attitude to what she's used to, but she was very nice about it and very charming. I think sometimes Graham has me on if maybe some of these big Hollywood stars are a challenge, and hopefully I help him to just make them feel a bit more at ease. So I've had curious conversations with Alice Cooper and Goldie Hawn, for example.
I want to talk to you about your comic timing and where that started. I mean, you were a stand-up comedian for a period. Do you still think of yourself as a comedian?
I did. You know, it was so brief as to not really count. Mostly what I did was improvise. I did belong to something called the Comedy Store Players for about 6 years, which was an improvisational troupe at the Comedy Store, and indeed is kind of where Whose Line Is It Anyway came from. So I was more of an improviser than I was a stand-up comic. I find it really difficult to... When people say, what do you do for a living? You have to write down sometime profession, and I put show off because I can't really think what covers what I do. But if I had an ambition, it would be to adopt the title that my father had, which is broadcaster and writer. Then I think that sounds grown up, doesn't it? Comedian sounds a bit. They always put comedian as if you're As if you're a bit naff. Somehow.
As if it makes a difference.
Yeah, that's a bit of an N.
I mean, Whose Line Is It Anyway was where I first got to know you proper, because, I mean, you were on every week, and that was such a great show. It seems like a lot of formats have come from that since, although that show's still not with us.
Yes, it's kind of a smart-ass format, isn't it? Let's not bother with that naughty thing called writing and having a thought about things. Let's just do stuff off the top of our heads. And I feel slightly ashamed now because I think there's too much of it now. I do think we could do with, I'm a big advocate of properly written drama, real actors, proper construction, direction, and so on. So I am moving more in that direction. This last summer, I was the artistic director for a project on Sky Arts Television. We brought back live drama for the first time on television in 30 years. And those are the things that I'm much more interested in. But yes, Whose Line? I mean, it was fun in its time, Whose Line. But it was, I think, possibly that form of television. That'll do now. Shut that box and do something else.
Sad thing is, though, there seems to be more and more of it because it's cheaper to do. If you don't have comedy writers, you don't have to pay them, and this is where reality TV's come from, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But I do hope that it's kind of had its day now. I would really like to see us investing some time and some money. One of the highest paid jobs in Hollywood is to be a comedy writer, and it certainly is not the case in this country. And it takes too long to get stuff on air. We need to get the television companies to shift along a little bit. Let's have an idea on the back of an envelope, and let's trust people to go and make it. And there's some wonderful, wonderful talent. I'm working with some really, really wonderful writers, young writers on the News Quiz. They're easily capable of writing some great comedy drama, and unfortunately there's very little opportunity for it. But I shall be out there banging their cause. That doesn't sound right, does it? Banging their cause, that can't be right. Banging something for their cause, I don't know what it'll be.
Well, you can Google at the same time.
I may Google while
Google whilst banging.
Oh, dear. Oh, I feel unwell.
The interesting thing about the News Quiz that I love is that you do jokes. It seems like comedians these days don't like a punchline, do they? They like stories.
Well, it's interesting because when I do for charity or whatever, I'll do I kind of stand up for about half an hour, and I do more stories. Although I'm a sucker for an old joke. And mostly they're just reworkings of old jokes. But I grew up in New York, and stand-up comedy definitely comes from a Jewish New York tradition of those kind of gags, and I love them. But here's the thing, they take hard work because they're crafted, and maybe it's easier to go, I was on the tube today and I noticed something. And one of the things we do on the News, because every single week we have fledgling writers, and that's something I learned very early on in my career. I had lots of wonderful people taught me. The first person who taught me that was the great Jack Douglas, who from the Carry On films I was in panto with him when I was 23. And he honestly, most nights he would stand in the wings watching me work as I do patter with the audience. And he'd say to me afterwards, what you want to try, Sandy? And you put this word here or try this. And I remember once I'd got this joke and he said, it's going very well, Sandy, but you're not leaving a big enough gap between the setup and the tag, what we call the button on the joke, the end bit of the joke. He said, what I want you to do is set the joke up and then look to me out of the corner of your eye in the wings, and I will nod to you when it's time to do the tag. That's so. I stood on stage and I waited and I thought, I'm going to die here. It's so long. And I finally did the tag. I got the biggest laugh I'd ever had. Genius. So it's a wonderful thing if you can pass on any of those tricks of the trade, and he certainly did that for me, and I try now to do that with the young writers on the News Quiz.
Now, I don't want to offend you, Sandy, but you have got a peculiar voice. Can you remember when somebody said to you, you're a bit odd?
I got a review.
I mean that in the nicest possible way.
When I was in the Cambridge Footlights, which is a sort of review group at Cambridge, some student wrote about me in the student newspaper. Sandi Toksvig is too much like Alan Wicker for her own good. And it made me laugh at the time. But I realised then that possibly there was something a bit curious about it. I don't listen to myself. I never listen to programmes I've been on. I don't ever watch myself on television. I don't do that because I think then you become over-analytical. For me, over-analytical. And that way lies madness, I think. Mostly I do my job and I go home.
It's also interesting about the taste and decency thing. I mean, you get away with more on your News Quiz and on Radio 4. It seems like there's a certain, it's the News Quiz, you can get away with it. I mean, the language and the topics you talk about.
Do you not think, though, if they took us to court, it would be a hilarious case? Do you not think? Me, Jeremy Hardy, Andy Hamilton, Francis Wheen, Sue Perkins in the dock. And the government having a pop at us. Well, bring it on, is what I say.
Is now a good time for comedy? I mean, there's a lot going wrong, and that often gives you more to talk about. And the more stupid politicians are or their behaviour is, then you've got more jokes. How are you doing now on the scale of writing them?
It's almost too easy now. Bless their hearts. It's really sad, actually. It's a kind of a golden period, I have to say, in terms of things they're asked to talk about. Expenses, duck houses. You just want to say thank you so much. Sarah Palin, wasn't she a joy? she was. You can't quite believe it. Lord Mandelson, just constant source of entertainment to us. Hazel Blears, little squirrel nutkin, just caused us endless hours of joy. So it's really sort of too easy. Although I have to say, at the moment we're all feeling we started feeling sorry for Gordon Brown. That's always a bad stage. When you think, oh, shame. I'll go easy now.
What happens when you meet somebody on the Friday who did a gag about on the Thursday?
Well, I did actually. The other day I sat next to George Osborne at in a restaurant, and I nearly said something to him. Sorry about the odd joke at your expense. I hope that what they know is that it's my job and it's what I do, and I take it very seriously, and we're very well prepared, and that mostly it isn't personal. They were saying that one of the new sort of ideas about jokes is that you mustn't make fun of people in the public eye, and what we said was, well, we'll carry on making jokes about people in the public eye as long as they keep filling the public eye with morons. And I think it's a sort of a job that we have. But you would hope that you could still perfectly comfortably sit and have a nice drink with them, and for them to know that it wasn't personal.
I don't know how it works for you, but my lawyers have always told me if it's someone like Jordan, you can make as many jokes as you like because she's so out there, she couldn't possibly say anything about your jokes, whereas somebody who's private, you have less of a right to do jokes about them.
Yeah, and I think you probably wouldn't. If people set themselves up, take a case in point, Peter Mandelson. Peter Mandelson is now king of everything. He runs everything. He's the man charged with bringing us back from recession. He hasn't been, as far as I remember, elected, and as far as I remember, it was a parliamentary democracy. So I'm trying to go back now to my A-level politics, and therefore I think he's a fair target. So I don't have a problem with that. A private individual, I think it's very rare, unless somebody's done something, worthy of a Darwin Award, something that has really challenged the survival of the species as a private individual. It's very rare that we would have a go at them, and I dislike cruel comedy just for the sake of it. So I was never a big fan of the many jokes that were made about Jade Goody. I felt we should be making jokes about the education system that produced her in the first place.
It's an interesting point you make. I mean, when politicians as husbands are downloading mucky movies, it's hard not to make jokes, though, isn't it? I mean, there are some people who are just saying, please do a joke about me.
Yeah. Okay, he was an exception. He was just joyous, wasn't he? But you see, Jackie Smith, Home Secretary, right? That's a very important job. And it was only after she left that she felt she hadn't actually really been qualified for the job. Okay, here's a newsflash. Don't take the job, okay? If somebody said to me, do you want to be Home Secretary? I'm going to go, you know what? Not so much. I'm not even Secretary of my own home, never mind about in the country. So I'm, what an absurd thing to put porno down on your expenses. That's madness. But the moat cleaning, And then there was this big thing last week because you're allowed to spend £2,000 on cleaning and £1,000 on gardening. And did moat cleaning count as gardening or cleaning? We weren't really sure. And could you put £3,000 towards moat cleaning? These are complicated issues that somebody needs to ask.
When I wake up in the morning, I have a squirt and a wipe. Why can't they do the same? Why do they need a cleaner?
I don't know, Danny. You have a squirt and a wipe in the morning, do you? I think you should edit that bit out.
Let's do some business for you because you've got a brand new book. It's a book, basically, articles that you've written for the papers, and it's you just being whimsical and witty and funny, and then they put it in a book, and I sit there by the pool and have a lovely time. Well,
I'm very glad to hear it. I have been writing for the Sunday Telegraph now for... golly, it must be about 6 years. And what's so lovely is that they just say to me, could you deliver every week just under 900 words? So I deliver 898 as a matter of principle. And I sit there filleting out words. And what's joyous is that whatever has taken my fancy, they let me write about it. So this week, it was I was tied up with history, very interested in history. It was the anniversary of the unveiling in 1512 of the Sistine Chapel. Now, you may not remember Mr. Michelangelo, but Mike caused endless trouble because he showed the genitalia of the saints. And they then hired another painter to paint breeches and loincloths and fig leaves on all of them. I was lying in my bedroom looking at the ceiling, which needs decorating, and thinking, wonder if we should do a fresco. So I've been writing about this week about lying on my back thinking about porn, which just I was, but it was in relation to the Sistine Chapel. So they allow me to do that. If I read, for example, that more people are killed on donkeys than in plane crashes every year, this leads me to question how safe I will be next time I go to Blackpool and decide to go on. So they're just sort of they're slightly rambly, but they're always related to history. And actually, what happens is anything that has happened today has almost certainly happened yesterday. And maybe if bless him, George Bush or even Tony Blair had read a single history book, we wouldn't be in Afghanistan today. So I always have behind it, there is, I hope, some serious point. It's a bit like the news quiz. We make jokes, but we make them with serious intent. And I think those are the best kind.
And again, there's something about your delivery and who you are that you can be incredibly cutting with a smile. I mean, you can smile and you be so glorious and get your little knife out with your little punchline and stab them in the heart.
Well, I did a terrible thing this morning. I don't know what I'm turning into, a strange, eccentric old woman. I was standing on the train and there was a lot of people trying to sit down and I was waiting patiently behind them and a very large man in a pinstripe suit said, "Can I get through?" And I said, "No, you can have good manners and wait."
I love it. Look, we've got a few. I haven't even asked you one question yet. Should we get on with the questions? You like singing?
No, singing doesn't like me. I have a tin ear, but I am. I do love music. If I come back in another life, I shall be fantastically musical. And I have performed on occasion with the glorious Gay Men's Chorus, who are 140 strong and make the most wonderful sound. And indeed, I performed at the Various Voices concert at the festival hall with them, and they're great. And I love big noises. I mean, if you ever have the privilege of hearing or indeed singing in the Messiah or the Creation or any of those wonderful pieces of music, your heart is lifted. So yeah, I love it.
And panto, any more pantos? I mean, you did that at one point.
I did do panto 2 years ago, and because it was written by Stephen Fry, there was much cross-dressing, and I played a man, and I had a moustache, and my hair had a side parting and macassar, and I was wearing a tuxedo. Anyway, I looked out the window of my dressing room in one interval on a matinee and saw a traffic warden giving me a ticket unnecessarily because I'd parked correctly. And so I went out, I was very cross, and I was telling him off and saying I'd forgotten that I was in full costume. And he leant down after about 3 minutes of this tirade from me and went, "You're a funny sort of man." So no panto.
What do you want people to remember you as? A funny lady, a witty lady, a lady who's obviously very bright, a writer? What are you?
Long living, that would be good. I don't know. I don't like pigeonholes. I really don't. And I'm 51 years old, and I sort of think that the thing I'm supposed to do hasn't happened yet. So the answer is I don't know. I trained originally as a human rights lawyer. I sometimes regret that I didn't do that. But I think it may not be too late. I do hope that the best is yet to come.
Topless modelling. What are we talking about?
Do you know, I was asked to pose topless just recently for the very first time, 51. Well, admittedly it was for my mammogram, but nevertheless there you go, an old joke just for you.
But I didn't see it coming. Hey. They're only old if you've heard them, aren't they? Listen, congratulations on anything. The new book is in the stores now. Thank you for being you. You're just unique and totally wonderful and funny and special, and there really aren't that many people who are different these days. Everybody wants to look the same and act the same and be the same, don't they?
Oh no, darling, I am entirely different, I have to say. We were discussing size 0 models on the news quiz. I said, I'm that rare thing, I'm a shape 0, which is terribly pleasing.
Now listen, priorities. You've got to go and record the news quiz and get back to your lollipop.
My lollipop, yes, and the phone keeps ringing, so I must go and answer it. It was really nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.